Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to this wonderful discussion today. I am actually the third speaker in the row who is based in Washington, D.C., and it is now quarter past midnight, and I have to say I'm getting old, so this is way past my bedtime. So my apologies in advance if I'm not really coherent, and I also want to apologize for keeping my remarks fairly brief. But I wanted to share a couple of thoughts. First of all, I am based in Washington, D.C., but I direct the Wilson Center's Indo-Pacific program. And I travel quite a lot in the region. And I just got back from Delhi a couple of days ago. I was in Thailand last month. I will be in Taiwan next month as well. What I am hearing is this: there is a great deal of concern about what is happening in Washington, what will happen with the new administration, but also, let's face it, whatever happens with the Trump administration, it will only be for 4 years. But there is concern that there is a seismic shift in what is happening in the United States and how the United States perceives itself and how it identifies as the Indo-Pacific fat power today and moving forward. And I raise this because here in Washington, since the election, there has been a considerable shift in how we are expecting the Trump administration to move. So as you may recall, unlike in Trump 1, this particular election, Trump won decisively. He won the popular vote. He won both the House and the Senate. Trump now controls, the Republicans now have control of not just the White House and Congress, but the Supreme Court justices are predominantly Republican as well. And so we have that situation. We also see that there is a boom in US assets, especially in the stock market, and the tech sector is doing particularly well. And at the same as we are concerned about the rise of technology and billionaires taking over into government and not simply lobbying for their interests, but actually becoming greatly involved in the process of government, there is also considerable excitement here in the United States about what that actually may mean, and how that may actually restore some of America's competitive edge moving forward. So that's an uncomfortable truth that reflects some of the realities here in the United States. Another uncomfortable truth is that although the Indo-Pacific is critical, and I think we all agree upon that, the US focus in the immediate term is unfortunately going to be towards Russia and towards the Middle East. And then the third uncomfortable truth, I'm afraid, is that much as there is a great deal of belief and support for the Indo-Pacific strategy in the United States, the Indo-Pacific strategy that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had been at the forefront of putting forward, there is a great deal of concern that despite a lot of consensus about it, a lot of efforts to coordinate on an Indo-Pacific strategy, that it actually hasn't achieved what it is supposed to do. That is to say, even though the strategy has been in place, it has not stopped China's ambitions. The Chinese economic growth may have slowed down, and there are certainly people who still claim that there is this peak China idea, that China's economic robustness is now on a downward trend and it will continue to slide. We know nonetheless that China's ambitions and aspirations for itself and the ability of the Chinese government to identify and target and spend considerable resources to bolster its economy and target strategic industries is more robust than ever. And then the third, and then of course, we know that the Chinese have done an incredibly effective job in reaching out to the global south. So, with all of that, I am actually cautiously optimistic about the power of the so-called middle powers, which actually I believe includes Australia as well as Japan. It's all the countries that are not the United States and China in how I see it. Um, but this frustration about the Indo-Pacific strategies that the advanced economies have come up with, frustration also with China's big ambitions for itself that is actually disrupting the global rule of law, is actually an opportunity to re-engage the United States and its like-minded allies and partners, and what the Wilson Center is calling hitting the reset button in trying to come up with a new vision for the Indo-Pacific. Now, we've seen some success to date, I should add. We've seen the success of AUKUS. We've seen the expansion of the Quad. We've also seen the rise of the IP4, Japan, Australia, Korea, New Zealand becoming observer countries in NATO. These are all tremendous progresses that have been seen on the security front in particular. But when it comes to economic engagement, the Indo-Pacific strategies have essentially been weak. Most notably, the US-led IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which one of my colleagues calls a so-called nothing burger. That is to say, there's a lot of talk, but there's not a lot of content. So what can we do to take on this momentum? There is a need to recognize that things have not worked, but there is this opportunity to move forward. There is first of all, an opportunity to reinforce the fact that the United States is indeed an Indo-Pacific power. And over 100 years ago, when it started engaging in the region, it did so first and foremost, because of commercial interests. Those commercial interests are bigger and more greater in opportunity now. There is also a greater opportunity for like-minded countries to come together. And I think this is very important to stress with the incoming Trump administration, which is having this Department of Government Efficiency talking about cost-cutting measures. We need to talk about not necessarily shared interests and shared values, but we also need to talk more in their language, which is to talk about efficiency and cost-cutting measures, because power projection, the collectivism is actually going to lead to greater power projection. Then we also should be mindful of the fact that there are shared interests, and the biggest shared interest of them all is this concern about excessive dependence on China. There is a shared interest across the Indo-Pacific about managing risk and de-risking from China. And I believe that when the United States starts talking too much about the China challenge and China competition, that does lead to a wedge, especially between Southeast and South Asia in particular. Talking simply about that China challenge is divisive. We need to talk much more about threats to prosperity, and the need for trading nations to ensure that the rules of law continue to be transparent and predictable, so that businesses and individuals can actually be engaged with predictability and stability. We are facing greater industrial policy and protectionism all across the board, both in Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia as well. This is going to be a trend that we are going to see increasingly. And we are going to see a greater trend towards not necessarily deglobalization, but towards re-globalization. And as we look at a greater re-globalization, there are opportunities for like-minded countries to invest more in each other. Investment opportunities in South and Southeast Asia are particularly robust. But I also want to point out that there are the transferring of not just capital, but also of knowledge, and especially human capital is something that we should focus on. I think one of the previous speakers has talked about innovation opportunities, and there are greater opportunities for cooperation and collaboration in the STEM sectors. That is obvious. Another opportunity is going to be meeting the demographic challenge. In the Indo-Pacific, we have a sharp divide between a rapidly aging and shrinking demographic in Northeast Asia, in Japan, South Korea, and even in China, right? On the other hand, we have India, Southeast Asian countries that are very dynamic and robust. There is this opportunity to have a greater match. And this isn't simply about exploitative economic partnerships. But as we reassess the value chains in talking about supply chain efficiencies, we do see this opportunity for greater partnerships that's based on workforce development. Another area that we can see greater cooperation is in confronting economic coercion. That is to say, the Chinese trend to weaponize its economic dominance for political gain. We have seen some progress, but at the same time, I do believe that countries like Japan in particular, that has been at the forefront of putting that on the G7 agenda, it can do more. We can do more to share information about some of the coercive actions that China has been taking, and to call them out on it so that there is a deterrence effect, so that China does not take those actions in the first place. And then finally, I want to see this as an opportunity to readdress this issue of resource nationalism. We have a great deal of talk about export restrictions of critical minerals. There's also a great deal of concern in the global south about resource exploitation. We have this opportunity to rethink it so it does become an integral part of the conversation about moving up the value chain and also creating greater efficiencies and creating greater opportunities on both amongst both the advanced economies and the global south as well. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to continuing this discussion.